reminder, Jay.
That's good. So these are being recorded, so we can send them out. So if you miss something as we go through, there'll be a link sent out after this meeting, hopefully sooner than later, to where you can click that link and listen to the and fast forward through the parts that you want to, and listen to the parts you need. So it's also you can obviously share that link with other people in your district that want to be part of this Gemini project. So feel free to do that. One thing that we are requiring is that at least one representative from your district would be on these calls, present and accounted for each time, just so we can ensure that we're providing the support that we need to you all. So please don't rely just on the recordings, but that you have at least one person each time representing your district with each one of these calls. So with that, I think, it's really hard to get to know people through a Zoom meeting, but as far as moving forward today, we wanted to take a little bit of time, Tammy and I, to introduce ourselves. So I'll let Tammy go first.
Sure. So I've been a Kansas educator since 1990. I've taught 3-year-olds through 4th grade. Before coming to KSDE 4 years ago, I worked at Geary County USD 475 as a district instructional coach, where my role was to work with principals and building leadership teams on various goals related to school improvement. While at KSDE, I've worked as school improvement coordinator, overseeing the work of the Kansas Learning Network, and as assistant director, overseeing kindergarten readiness as the board outcome. So I'm really, really excited to be working in this capacity with all of you, and a little less office time and a little more time really focusing on the work that schools and teachers are doing across Kansas.
And so I'm Jay Scott. This is my 20th year in education. I started out at Nike Middle School in the Gardner-Edgerton School District as a science teacher and a coach. I went from Nike Middle School to Washburn Rural High School as a science teacher, and then moved into administration at Mission Valley High School for 1 year, and then at Shawnee Heights High School for 5 years before coming to the Department of Education. And I just started my 6th year at the Department of Ed. I've worked with many of you across the state. It's been an honor to do that in CTE and with individual plans of study. So we're very excited to move forward with this new endeavor. I grew up on a farm near Garfield, Kansas. Don't try to Google it. You can't even find it on Google. But Garfield's way out in southwest Kansas. Went to Kinsley Oferle schools. I finished at Dighton High School my last 2 years. I'm a Baker University grad. Go Wildcats, and the other type of Wildcats, I guess, in the state of Kansas. And I'm married to Amy, and I have 2 sons, a 5th grader and a freshman. So, but we're very excited to begin this project with the Gemini schools, and just want to take a little time to introduce ourselves. So at this time, we were planning on taking roll, but we can see pretty clearly from the participant list who's on the call. So what we'll do is we'll just go through that list, and as the call rolls on, and mark each of our districts off as who's part of the call, instead of doing the old school roll call. So I think that means we'll just move into our next slide. So what we'll do now is kind of what Tammy alluded to before, is set the table a little bit, so to speak, for this project, the redesign project, where the idea came from, and some of the data behind why this project is in place in Kansas. And as many of you probably are aware of, the community conversations that Randy and Brad had across the state, it seems like a long time ago, but it was really just a couple years ago, and asking communities across the state, one question was, what are the attributes of a successful 24-year-old in Kansas? And really, you'll see from the slides that we're presenting that really what Kansans said really forms the bones of this redesign project. So the first question was that Kansas communities were asked was, what are the attributes? And so there you can see the responses. And And I'll say this, over 66% of the people who responded to that question in the community conversations were educators. And so it was really, these are, if you're asking what school educators expect are the attributes of a successful young person, this is what they told us. 23% academic skills, reading, writing, those kinds of things, 70% non-academic skills. A lot of people refer to them as the soft skills, but social, emotional, personality skills, 21st century skills, lots of names, but they were named 70% of the time. The one that was most often mentioned was conscientiousness. But I think that's an important part of the narrative. The people who responded to this, 66% were educators. So we feel like this is a really strong basis for the project moving forward. They also, Brad and Randy also went and met with business and industry and asked them the same question. And if you compare what they said to what Kansans all across the state said, if volume can be equated with importance, the business and industry groups are saying that the non-academic characteristics are more important than academic skills, including applied skills. So, even more of a testament to how out of balance we've been. And so through this redesign project, there's an opportunity now to rebalance schools in Kansas in line with what Kansans are telling us they want out of their schools.
So then the next question is, if this is what businesses and industry in Kansans are saying they want, then what is the role of K12 education in achieving this future? And so those responses fit into two broad themes. 37% said skill training, and 63% said strategic activities. And we're going to break those down a little bit more so that you can see what they considered to be skill training and what they considered to be strategic activities. So the first one is school climate and culture, and making sure that schools are places where families feel like they are a part of the learning, and where there are high expectations, and there's a positive and supportive culture for developing the whole child.
And then career planning is a huge part, and it's got a lot of attention at the secondary levels, 6, 7 through 12. But to what degree are districts starting earlier with their students in the elementary level around career planning, and not asking the question, what do you want to be? But asking the question, what do you like? Or what do you know about? And so at the elementary level, career planning looks like, or could look like, career exposure. So you take them to big buckets of related industries like ag or business, and the kids can just start to build some framework around what those jobs entail at a really high level. And then when you get into the middle grades, really start asking that question more and more, what do you like to do? And then taking the students' responses to that and then applying it and finding related careers with that, firming it up as you go into high school and then into post-secondary.
Family engagement is huge, and especially when it comes to career planning, but having those partnerships between schools and families that starts early. And and when we say early, we're even talking like birth through pre-K. What kinds of relationships are schools and districts able to build with parents, as soon as they bring a baby home from the hospital? Are those parents being reached out to, and do they see their little one as a baby jay or a wildcat cub? Are they associating with the school and the district very, very early on? Also, making sure that families are participating and engaged in a child's education, and really looking at the developmental progression of family engagement, such as the way parents are engaged in a kindergartner or a first grader's schooling needs to be a lot different than the way they're engaged as a freshman or a sophomore, because we know that when parents try to engage at the high school level the way they engaged at the elementary level, we call them helicopter parents, right? So what are the stages of development for family engagement as students go through your system, and how are parents and families still engaged at the high school level with that gradual release of responsibility, so that when we graduate students, they're independent and they have those skills. They don't need a helicopter parent in order to function at college.
Then another one of the strategic activities that Kansan's mentioned over and over, and again, these really kind of form up the, when we talk through the bedrock principles of the project, you'll see these strategic activities as part of those bedrock principles. But community collaboration, how involved is the community in your school district? Is it at the, the level that traditional schools, where parent-teacher conferences or different nights that you have, or is it much deeper than that, and is it mutually beneficial? Do people in the community see the school as a partner that not only is asking for them to be part of it, but they're also reaching out to the community and helping in the community through community service? Those kinds of things are very, very important in moving this forward, redesigning it, because it's going to take people outside the school behind it, number one, and then really involved in it, number two. So a big part of it will be community collaboration.
And then individualized instruction and experience in varied intensity, from career interest diagnostics to universally required individual plans that students must personally defend. So the timing is very beginning in kindergarten to middle school to 8th grade. So how individualized is instruction? Individualized and personalized. Our schools can't look like assembly lines where every student gets the same thing. It needs to be individualized in experience, in time, and lots of choice.
Real world instruction, so students working through concrete, real life, relevant problems to solve. That's what Kansan said they wanted in their schools. Maybe, there are times when abstract content needs to be part of it, but the majority of the time students are working through concrete, real life, relevant problems that engage them, that they see the meaning behind. And so that's something that came through even as early as pre-K, that came through the conversations.
Project-based learning is something that Kansan said they wanted more of, where students are engaged in long-term projects, where they have an opportunity to demonstrate skills, where projects are used to evaluate how students apply content knowledge. And when we're talking about project-based learning, we're talking as early as pre-K as well. The smallest of our Kansans, when they are in developmentally appropriate preschools, kindergartens, first grades, those really set the foundation for more complex project-based learning as they get older. So really looking at what kinds of precursor skills need to be put in place so that by the time they are in like 3rd grade, 4th grade, they have the skills to engage in more complex problems and projects. And then early childhood strategies include strengthening the foundations of language and social skills. So we're, a really high emphasis in oral language development and that social skills development. Somewhere along the way, in some cases, preschools became highly focused on, how many letter names and letter sounds do children know, and kind of pushing down that kindergarten curriculum into early childhood. And while some of that is viable and developmentally appropriate, just, really those opportunities for building vocabulary and oral language and those social skills really set that foundation so that when they are in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they have the social skills that it takes to be involved in more complex project-based learning.
And just some of the less frequently cited strategies, but certainly just as important, different teaching techniques. Those that were mentioned over and over were integrated collaborative teaching, teaching as facilitators, engaging students, and teaching teachers how to teach soft skills or 21st century skills. Human capital, increasing the number of counselors was mentioned, which really fits with the individual career planning piece. More professional development for elementary math teachers was mentioned. The more striking suggestions in the accountability part was more autonomy for teachers. And that's certainly something that needs to be part of the redesign. Meeting the Rose standards. Then college collaboration and extracurricular activities were mentioned. Not as much, but we all know how important it is that college piece, and we're not just talking four-year university, and we all know that, but that college collaboration piece, and then the value of extracurricular activities, especially teaching some of those non-academic skills. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about how extracurricular activities can really be a key piece of the redesign. So again, those are some of the strategic activities that were listed as what Kansan said need to be part of what our schools look like now. And the other part that he mentioned, that the role of K12 should be around skill training.
So this is broken out into 4 areas: instrumental skills, non-academic, academic, and critical thinking. Those instrumental skills are defined as those employability skills, skills that are generally used for living, like financial skills. I think of all of the skills that students learn through a FACS class, making sure that all students have these skills and opportunities to learn them within the school day.
And then the non-academic, some of those skills mentioned 15% of the time, really getting into that whole host of what we all call different things: social emotional skills, soft skills, 21st century. A lot of people call them hard skills, but they're non-traditional skills, perseverance over failure, conscientiousness, those kinds of skills, which a lot of people have trouble sometimes thinking of those as skills, but Kansas said we need those in our schools.
And then, the academic skills. I mean, we're assuming that when we graduate students and they walk across the stage and get a high school diploma, we're assuming that they can read and they can do math and they can write and they know content-focused knowledge in science and in history and geography. So, I mean, it's not like we're saying no more academics. We just have to say it's more than academics.
And then I think this speaks to the state board's definition of a successful high school graduate, the critical thinking piece with the cognitive skills that students need to be able to think through problems, really, diverse problems, long-term problems that take a while to solve, and sticking with something. Just critical thinking skills are very important as part of skill training.
So in a nutshell, this is what Kansas said they want from their schools. Kansas children need quality preschool, including all-day kindergarten. Changes need to be made to address school culture. There needs to be a new dynamic role for counselors and social workers. We know that the mental health needs of our students, there are more needs now than ever at a time when, counseling and social working positions have been decreased or in some places eliminated. And we know that teachers are not equipped with the skill or or even emotionally to help with the mental health of students. And so really looking at those new and dynamic roles for counselors, guidance counselors, career counselors, and that mental health piece.
And then also what Kansas wanted from their schools is a collaboration between schools and businesses. You know, in the CTE world, I know that that's part of having a pathway, but to a larger scale now, and really trying to connect schools and businesses in ways that are, again, mutually beneficial. A lot of businesses need to hear that their future employees are in our schools. And so that kind of collaboration, again, mutually beneficial, will be key to the redesign project. The next one is might be the one that raises the most eyebrows as far as the work involved to do this. But I think this one is really the key to any redesign that we've got going in Kansas. It's reorganizing our schools around each student, not the system. So Kansas said over and over, they're done with the industrial style model of education. It needs to be personalized. It needs to be customized for each student. And to wrap our minds around that as educators can really be something that can drive you crazy, but that's what being part of this project is all about. You got to be a little crazy. So, but reorganizing our schools around each student. And then community service needs to play a bigger role. And I know in a lot of our schools that's a requirement and that's an expectation of students as they go through. And how can we strengthen that and build that up and scale that across the state? So that's in a nutshell, just the community conversations, the business industry conversations. We wanted to review that. I know that was a review for many of you. We wanted to go through that because that really forms up the basis for this project.
Okay, so I'm going to unmute everyone for just a bit here. If there are any questions or comments, you can, again, use the chat feature, but I'm also going to unmute you if you have a microphone. I'll unmute as long as there's not a bunch of background noise or feedback. So what questions do you have so far?
Questions, comments, even sarcastic ones.
Yeah, that. Okay. Well, please feel free to use the chat feature. I'm going to turn the mute back on. Whew. Why is this crazy? Okay, it says, will you provide a recording of our design team members who couldn't be here? Yes, we will be providing a recording of this. What have you learned so far from the Mercury districts? That's a great question.
That is a really good question. We've made it to 6 of the 7 so far, and really have given them basically what we just provided, and then had some conversations with those districts about maybe some specific ideas that they have already in mind for redesign. But just the attitude has been really impressive. I think with the level of change that I think we're asking schools to make in a year's time can be overwhelming, but we didn't get a sense of that hardly at all until we told them that they did have to roll it out next year. So there were a few eyebrows raised on that one, but other than that, I think just the community belief in this, the faith in the leadership in that school district. I know that exists in your school districts as well. It was just really gratifying to talk to people that are so excited about changing in their schools. And some of the teachers made some very, I think, telling comments that they weren't really sure what they were voting for, but they had faith in their leadership in their school district. So that speaks well of everyone who applied to get 80% of your staff to believe in this when there's really not a lot of details provided other than we're going to redesign our schools. So that was really gratifying to hear that as a response from our schools that we've been out in.
Availability of the PowerPoint so we can share. Yeah, I'm going to share with you a Gemini project file, Google file, that will be shared with all of you, and I'll upload this presentation to this file so that everyone has it. Okay, not seeing any other questions. We wanted to show you some, how flexible with the state system be as we think outside the box to redesign our school around students. Example, attendance, seat time, assessments, pacing for graduation.
Great question, Melissa. That's something that you know that we've said the sky's the limit with this project, and we certainly don't want. We know there are going to be obstacles as we go along the way, policy obstacles, things around seat time that you bring up. The seat time, actually, since 2005 in Kansas, we've got it on the books in the QPA regs that says once a student shows mastery that they can be awarded the credit at that time. So the seat time requirement is one that is largely still in place, but it's not something that's a requirement. So that's something that we need to make sure we communicate clearly with schools, is that maybe there are some policies out there that people think exist, but they really don't. But the other part about it, there are some real obstacles that are going to pop up. We've got a policy advisory group to take those issues as they pop up to that group, and that group consists of people from KBOR, KNEA, USA. We've got KSHA on our policy advisory group. You know, so we've got a group of people that when these things pop up, like attendance or assessments or pacing for graduation, we can take that to that group and make sure that we're not doing anything that's going to inhibit the students' learning or their track through education into a career. Great question.
Will you share what you learned from Mercury districts? If so, how? Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're going to have these opportunities with you every 2 weeks. And that's when we'll be sharing with you exactly what we're sharing with the Mercury districts. And then, you know, as they, along the way, as they kind of, you know, explore things and do things, we'll be sharing that with you. We're also going to create a professional learning community through Voxer, which is an app that is kind of like a walkie-talkie. You can talk into it or you can text. We're going to be posting a question of the week, and then all of the Mercury and the Gemini people can jump on, and you know, it's brief. You can do it on your own time, but then you can see the thread of conversation. So we'll put you in touch with them that way. And then Jay, do you want to describe a little bit of what we have planned with our Service Center Association?
Sure. So one thing that Bart Swartz at Greenbush and Michael Kuntz, they're working hard with all the service centers to develop a couple of events, hopefully a couple, to where we bring together the Mercury and the Gemini schools and any other schools outside those two groups that are interested in redesigning and interested in the redesigning project just to learn more. So we're looking at a couple of dates, one in the fall, and then the other one would be in the spring, and it's the Kansans Can Symposium. We're going to use that. Some of you have been to that one in the past, or maybe not, but that in the past, the Kansas Can Symposium, I think it was just first launched a couple of years ago, but it was all around the 5 outcomes. Well, they're going to add a strand for the redesign project, and so that'll be another opportunity for Mercury, Gemini, and all other interested schools to get together to learn more.
Okay, well, those were fantastic questions, and I know that sometimes these Zoom meetings don't seem that interactive, so I really appreciate your questions. I'm going to show you some things in this file, and we're going to start with the Gemini project expectations. So you want to start with that?
Sure. You know, just at the top, those bulleted points, those are just our expectations to be part of the Gemini project, participate in just this today, the video PLC sessions with the other Gemini schools. And I know we have some service center folks on as well. that you set a project launch date that occurs no later than the spring of 2020. We talked a lot about this. We wrangled with this one. We didn't feel it was fair to keep the Gemini schools at the same timeline as the Mercury schools, but that doesn't mean that you can't launch next year. You absolutely can. But at least by the spring of 2020, that you would in your district launch a redesign. Obviously, I know that most people think about, when they think about launching something that transformative, that they want to do it at the beginning of the year. So if you're thinking like that, your launch date would be August of 2018 or August of 2019. But you have that decision to make. And then if you just share your launch date when that forms up, and I think we've got an October 1st deadline for that, but we'll get more out about that. But give you some time to think about when should we launch this in our schools. You'll be able to participate in opportunities to collaborate with other Gemini and Mercury schools, much like today. Develop and share the project timeline with us. I just mentioned that. You are to be part of Gemini. You do need to redesign one elementary and one secondary. That could be either your middle or your high school, or both if you have it combined. And you also need to adhere to the redesign fundamental principles, which are in this Venn diagram, the same principles that the Mercury schools are following as well.
So in this diagram, it shows, some things are specific to just elementary, some to just the secondary, and the one in the middle is the system, and elementary and secondary need to take these into consideration. So this is, I like to say that this is what you're redesigning around, but how you do that is up to your building, up to your district, your community. So that's where it really gets customized. But the what is, first and foremost, that social emotional learning. How do you redesign around the social emotional needs of students and pull the academics into that? The school is organized around students, and there's some breakout bullet points. Student choice in learning activities, long-term projects are part of daily learning, and extracurricular activities. How can we take the extra out of extracurricular? We know that students who are from middle class and upper class families have a variety of opportunities for extracurricular. Somebody's taking them to piano lessons, someone's taking them to dance lessons, someone's making sure that they have what they need to do 4-H projects. How do we take those kinds of project-based learning experiences and make it so that all students have that opportunity within the school day? And so, so at the elementary level, there are some really exciting ideas out there, I can't wait to share with you. But also at the secondary level, how do you make sure that all students have an opportunity to feel a part of something? There's so many benefits to being part of a sports team or a debate team, but how do you make sure that all students have something like that they can plug into so that they can connect with a caring adult in the building?
And then physical activity and learning are tied to each other, and that's not just about like a PE class or some active class like that. That speaks more to students actually engaged through doing. In project-based learning environments, those kinds of things. And then also a balance of learning activities, structure, and assessment around the 5 areas of a successful high school graduate. So if you look in our schools right now across the state, where does the balance lie across those 5 areas in what goes on in that school as far as the activities, the structure, and the assessment? A lot of our schools, I think, would end up they heavily be swayed towards academic and technical, and cognitive maybe. But as far as employability and civic engagement, is there a balance that schools can find to balance those 5 areas across the board? Student and family relationships are going to be key to this redesign project. When you're talking about redesigning your school centered on the student, on each student, that means there needs to be a positive relationship with that student and the student's family and the school. And usually that results in at least one person in that building that really has the child's heart in mind. And really knows that student and their family. So to what degree can we maybe look at our human capital and reallocate how people function, in different roles in their schools to make sure that each student and family have at least one advocate in that school. And then business, industry, and community relationships, that really speaks to the community wide effort that this redesign requires. And then also, work-based learning experiences, or your elementary students want to go visit a local business, and it's a good experience. So all those kinds of things are very important across both the elementary and the secondary principles of this project.
On the elementary side, I'm sure it's no surprise that early childhood and kindergarten readiness is a redesign component. And when we say early childhood, we're expanding that to mean birth through age 8. And so, as you're thinking about, your full day kindergarten program and how developmentally appropriate it is, maybe you have preschool, or you're trying to build relationships with those existing preschool opportunities in your area. And then, really trying to stretch our thinking to, that birth, what kind of parent education can the school lead for those parents of the tiniest ones. And then the other part is art and music are important to the development of each child. A lot of that social emotional learning and that project-based learning can happen in the context of art and music instruction. And so how do we bring art and music back? Over time, we got so busy with reading and math, especially at the elementary level, that, art and music opportunities just dwindled and dwindled. We've got to bring that back, knowing that when we're looking at the whole child and that social emotional learning, that art and music and the activities and projects and choice, those are things we need to bring back in a new way.
And then what's unique to the secondary redesign will be an individual plan of study for every student. I know that all of you are aware of that, and I know a lot of our schools are fully implemented with individual plans of study, and are now in the process of tweaking that. So an intense focus also on high school graduation and post-secondary success. And it's kind of hard to say that intense focus on high school graduation, because that's a lag measure. The work's going to be done before that happens, and then once that high school graduation rate comes out, it's just out there. It's a lag measure. There's not much you can do about it. The real work of the redesign will be the things that you can do while you have students in the building to help improve that lag measure of high school graduation. Right now, as a state, we're at 86% high school graduation rate. That puts us in the top 10. But of course, we're not satisfied with that. We'd like that to be a lot higher. And then post-secondary success is somewhat of a new measure that schools are looking at, and that's looking at students a year out, basically, of high school, and where they are in that year out. Are they re-enrolled for a second year in a university or a technical college or community college? Are they have they earned an industry recognized certification, or have they earned an associate's degree? And those are the three markers really right now that we have. They're certainly not the only markers of post-secondary success. They're just the ones that right now we can capture. We're still working on, hopefully at some point we'll be able to look at military and job and employment. So those focuses, and I know that the post-secondary success conversation really is, we've talked to some schools, it really is the driving force behind this redesign project. And also we need, even though it's listed under secondary, it is a pre-K through 12 measure. So you start with some of the skills that kids need to graduate high school and to be successful in the post-secondary level. You start that in pre-K. So it's very important that we embrace this as a pre-K through 12 and on. Those measures. So we wanted to stop at that point because that's more of our fire hose version, but we want to just ask a couple questions, and you can respond through chat, or if you want to risk unmuting and speaking it out. But is there anything on that list, those bedrock principles that you see before you, is there anything that surprises you?
And instead of unmuting everyone, you can unmute yourself one at a time if you'd like to, or we can use the chat feature.
Well, it's really good to hear silence on that one, because I think that if you look at, yeah, great to see music and art as a focus at the elementary, absolutely. I think that if you look at that, look at those bedrock principles, you'll see the 5 outcomes woven in throughout. And so it's really nice to hear that nothing really surprises anyone.
Okay.
What about anything that intrigues anybody? Something that piques your interest?
A question from earlier. Jay, I think you talked about making sure that we have a balance in the 5 areas of academic skills, non-academic, technical, social, emotional. And you talked about how to measure that balance. For example, reallocation of roles perhaps, or perhaps participation. Can you give us any more or speak to any more possible measures that we can watch?
Well, we know that right now we're out of balance at the state level in what we measure, right? At the state level, what we measure are state assessments in reading and math, and so we're out of balance already. So we're also looking at different measures at a state level that may or may not impact what the local level decides to start looking at. So we haven't really gotten down into other different measures for employability skills or measures for cognitive abilities, but we know that schools are doing some of that work already. So some of it can just be that we connect you with this group, and we have others we're going to rely on this group to come up with ideas on how should we measure employability skills, how should we measure different things like that. So we don't have a lot of information yet on how to balance those out. So it's a really good question.
Well, and I think too that when we talk about assessing it, we've got to stop thinking about a separate test. We want, how do you assess those employability skills within a project? You know, what kinds of employability skills do you expect students to demonstrate, you know, within a long-term project? So when we talk about assessment, let's not think that there has to be another test. But how can it be authentically evaluated within this work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, consolidating, you know, if you asked our kids if they're assessed too much, they might say yes. So if we can come up with an idea around that of how we consolidate things like a project, or, you know, living in the CTE world the last 5 years, every classroom in the state of Kansas that's CTE focused is measuring academics, cognitive, technical, employability, and civic engagement. So, you know, it's some of it'll be things that we're already doing, and then we'll have to come up with some new ideas as well. Great question.
Okay. So I am going to show you the timeline that this is for the Mercury project, just so if you wanted to follow along with this timeline, you're certainly welcome to, but this has the Mercury launching this time next year. But it shows kind of an overview of the steps along the way. And so in phase 1, building the launch pad, what you're going to need to do, maybe not in this time frame, but you're going to need to make sure that you have a redesign team, and I'll show you some more resources about how to determine who your redesign team is. Develop or refine a shared vision. And one of the things that we're learning is that, districts have a vision, a powerful vision. They've been through a big visioning process with their community, but they don't necessarily have a building redesign vision. And so when we say, to have that shared vision, it would be really working with your staff and your families and your communities about when your school is redesigned, what will it look like? In for elementary teachers, what I've been finding is when the light bulb comes on for them, we talk about the successful 24-year-old Kansan, and we talk about the successful high school graduate. But at the elementary level, sometimes that's too far away. And so what I've been asking elementary schools to do is, okay, your building is K-5. What are the skills, attributes, and characteristics of your successful fifth grader who is ready to go on to middle school in your district? That, in a way, is a way to, kind of bring that, and then how do you get there? That's a way to bring that redesign vision, to the elementary level. But it's important that, whatever district vision or mission statement there is, there needs to be a specific vision for redesign. And so that'll be a big task. And then setting goals and action steps. So from that redesign vision, that's how you're going to select how you're going to meet those principles. There are so many things to choose out there. I mean, there's project-based learning, there's personalized learning, there's competency-based learning, there's career academies. There's so many things you could do. How are you going to choose? Or maybe you decide to choose pieces of many different things to meet your local vision. So that's going to be a really important part. The next phase, designing the rocket, is creating a comprehensive redesign plan, and I'll show you a template for that as well. What are all of the pieces that you have to consider before a launch, all of the things that you want to have planned for. And then, there might be certain redesign strategies that you want to test out on a small scale before you roll it out building-wide.
Yeah, and then phase 3, and again, this is the Mercury timeline. So this is what we'll expect from those schools, but you can elongate this one to fit, and you can follow your own process. But we felt like this was kind of breaks it down into nice, manageable chunks. So phase 3 is March to May, building the rocket, where you take the results from the redesign strategies you tested. Maybe you tried turning the bells off, or maybe you tried project-based learning around certain subject areas, or what have you. You took the data from that, and the ones that you liked, you put those into the redesign plan. The ones that didn't work, you keep out. But you put the redesign plan together. You start talking about what are the financial resources we need for this, what are our human resource needs, materials, the professional development. That is a huge piece with the redesign, is professional development plan that can support the redesign. And then you actually complete the design plan. That moves you right into phase 4, where the Mercury schools next June will be presenting their redesign plan to their local school board, and then they will come to Topeka and present it to the state school board. So that will officially be their end product to this year's project, and then they'd actually launch the plan in 18-19.
And so for the Gemini districts, we would anticipate that you would present your redesign plan to your local board, certainly. And then, then we can talk in the future about whether or not you want to share it with the state board. Right now, that's not a requirement, but we can talk more about that in the future. So I wanted to show you this graphic of what is involved in building a comprehensive redesign plan. And it starts in the center with a really strong why. And you know, all of you in your applications, you told us about a really strong why you wanted to be a part of this redesign project. And so, you know, making sure that everyone in your building feels, you know, the why. They understand it. They know why you're trying to embark on this adventure. But then it goes out from there to what would these changes look like in practice, in considering scheduling and timing, learning environment, student and teacher experience, all of those things around the edge. You know, what would these changes look like in practice? What resources do we need to make this happen? And, you know, and considering human capital and policy and infrastructure and things. How do we prepare our community for redesign? Talking about professional learning and communications, because any redesign effort that you do, your community has got to be cheering it on or it won't be sustainable. How do we implement changes and taking into consideration implementation support and change management? And then how do we scale and improve? You know, the purpose of these projects and these redesigns is to scale up. So, you know, whatever you're doing in 2 schools in your district, you want to build it with the thought in mind of scaling it up to all of the buildings in your district at some point in time. And then this is a little gold mine for you all. We've got 2 resources here: the Playbook for Redesigning Schools for the 21st Century and Designing New School Models. The Playbook is kind of what we're considering our guide. This was just published in March of 2017. It is published with foundation dollars and with the expertise and backing of Cross and Joftis, which may be a familiar name to you, but it really lays all of this out. So if you want to run ahead or you're just raring to go, you know, if you followed this guide in depth with fidelity, you're gonna have a high quality redesign plan that your community can believe in. And so it talks about establishing a redesign team and developing a shared vision, creating goals, strategies, and action plans. Like I said, this is just a little gold mine of you know, everything you wanted to know. And then, you know, it gives you, you know, establishing a positive school culture, understanding the stages of team development. Really, you know, this is like your one-stop place for redesign strategies. So I'm going to take you to this chapter on establishing your redesign team. One of the things that this lays out, and it really makes a lot of sense, is, you know, you already have established and functioning building leadership teams. And those building leadership teams have a lot on their plate. A lot of times they're the ones that are, you know, digging deep into data, they're planning interventions, they're totally supporting the principal in the day-to-day business of the school. And in a small district or a small school, you might want your building leadership team to also be the redesign team. But redesign is a lot of work. And so some of the things that this takes you through is considering who else or how that redesign team might be different, and taking into consideration the skills and attributes of different people. Here's an example template, and then they provide a blank template, but you want to have a broad representation. Consider the role, number of years at the school, subject, grades, specialty, etc. And so you want a broad representation. You want certainly your music, somebody representing music and art, someone representing content areas, someone representing your students with disabilities. You want to make sure that there's a broad representation. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you would want to choose the people that have been in your building the longest, because you want to select people for this redesign team that can bring a variety of perspectives, right? And so it might be your most experienced teachers. It might be a mix of teachers. You certainly want to consider that whether or not they have problem solving skills, whether they have good relationships with other staff members in the school, if they have data expertise or other skill. You want to make sure that they are on fire for redesign, that they are super excited, because you're going to pour gasoline on that. And that kind of excitement is what will bring their colleagues along. You need to pick people that follow through. A lot of times in education, you know, I'm not to be judgmental, but a lot of times we get excited about things and we start strong and then it fizzles off. And so you want to make sure you select people that always follow through. And then you want to make sure that they're committed. You know, nothing stalls a team more than when you have team meetings and half the people show up and the other half don't. And then the next time you meet, the people that were gone expect you to spend 30 minutes catching them up. So it has to be really, really committed to this redesign work.
And so that's the first task that the Mercury schools are working on, is forming up a redesign team. The second task is they're going to establish a vision for redesign in each building. So you may already have a really strong district vision, and even the buildings, you may have a real strong vision in your building. But do you have a vision that really works with this whole idea of redesign? So this chapter 2 of this playbook takes you through, and I think there's an activity 2.1 that we'll try to pull up here for you. But you want to have just a visioning. You start by brainstorming your values. What kind of learning do we value? How do we feel this can be achieved? And what would success look like? And a lot of the schools we've talked to are looking at, okay, when a student graduates our school, what do we want them to look like? What kind of skills do they need? What kind of activities do we need to expose them to prepare them for life after moving on to the next building? You know, it could be, if you've got a middle school involved, you're asking, what do they look like when they're heading to high school? If you've got high school, you're asking them, you know, what do they look like when they're out in that post-secondary world? Same thing for elementary schools. So having those kinds of conversation and setting a vision for what redesign looks like and what you want to achieve from that, and what your students would look like when they move on from a redesigned system. Those are the kind of high-level questions you want to be asking the redesign team to mull over, and so then they can form up a vision for this project. So those are the two tasks really that our Mercury schools are working on right now. I know we're pushing the time limit here. I think we're trying to get done by 11:30 here. So, but those are really what, if you're wanting to keep up with or your timeline wherever you are, those are the first two steps that we started with the Mercury schools. So are there any questions as we kind of wrap today? We appreciate, this was our maiden voyage, so knowing me, I'm just surprised that technology just didn't completely fail, but it's worked somewhat. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions anybody has about any of these resources in this Gemini project folder that you should all have access to? And if you want more people to have access to it, just email Teresa Cody or Tammy or I. If you want access for other people to this this project folder, that's perfectly fine. So we want to make this available to as many people in your district and community as needed. So
there's a question here. Will districts want to know how they can get a copy of the book? The book is available by PDF, and so access to this file means you have access to the book. So we'll, you know, if you want it printed, you know, that's on you. But so it's right here. So it's there for you to use. And we'll stay on here. You know, we've got these scheduled. You know, the first hour is kind of content like this. We're happy to stay on as long as you'd like to ask other questions. So go ahead and unmute if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, and just as we wrap up, too before we maybe get to an open discussion here, as people need to drop off. Our next virtual meeting is scheduled for September 22nd. So I know that initially we said every other week, but we've got a period of time now where school really needs to get going, and we didn't want to ask too much of the Mercury or the Gemini schools. So the next meeting will be September 22nd, our virtual meeting. We'll make sure you have the invitation to that. A couple of things to look at for your calendar. The annual conference this year, KSDE's annual conference, is in Wichita, as it always is. Thursday, October 12th, for both the Mercury and the Gemini schools, and that includes your SOUP, your principals, and your redesign teams. We're going to have a mixer. I wanted to make it a dance, but no one would DJ it. But we're going to have a mixer from 4:30 to 6:30 in the Riverview Ballroom at the Hyatt on Thursday, October 12th. 4:30 to 6:30, October 12th, Mercury and Gemini schools mixer. There'll also be, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but a couple of face-to-face meetings, regional meetings set up through the service centers with Mercury and Gemini districts and other schools who are interested. And that's basically it. So we're going to officially end the call now, but if you want to stay on and talk, we've got another 15 minutes or so free before we have to head to Olathe, that Tammy and I can stay on and have some conversations with you all. So
yeah, so thank you everyone for your attention, and you know, email Jay or I if you have questions along the way, and otherwise we will talk to you on September 22nd.
Looking forward to working with everybody. You guys take care.
Okay, another question, please.
Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. Appreciate the information that you just shared. Also, in my mind right now are swirling all the thoughts about the redesign. I'm very excited to get that going. In the back of my mind, I'm also thinking about where we're at with KISA and the KISA accreditation process. Do you see a blend of the two?
Well, actually, you know, this redesign is KISA. It's KISA on steroids because, you know, KISA asks districts to go through a needs assessment process and figure out how they are supporting those 5 board outcomes. And within KISA, districts are asked to choose 2 areas to focus on. And through redesign, we're asking you to focus on all of them. So it is completely the same thing.
Yeah, these are not parallel tracks.
Right.
Where you've got one that's redesign and then over across the way going in the same direction as accreditation. They are one and the same. So the things that you're going to go through as a process for accreditation in your district are the exact same things to go through to redesign.
Great, thank you.
The mixer on the 12th is at the annual conference
At the Wichita Hyatt.
The Wichita Hyatt in the Riverview Ballroom, 4:30 to 6:30.
And we'll send everyone a reminder.
Hey, we were wondering, we've had conversations with our local service center and was wondering what role you guys could see them playing. You know, we've talked a little bit about them kind of playing the role you guys are playing in this process. Of course, there's cost associated with it. So we're trying to figure out, you know, are other people interested in doing that? Have they reached out? We're just wanting to make sure that we do this as successfully as possible.
Well, Tracy, that's a really good question. As long as the project as long as you're meeting the expectations of the project and the bedrock principles, there's no waiver from those. There's nothing that, you know, as long as those things are being followed with fidelity, it doesn't matter who's leading it. You know, so it's up to Renwick to decide who can best lead them through this. according to the bedrock principles that we promoted. And we know that service centers are, have the capacity to go out and help schools through this. So yeah, in our mind, when we were setting this up, we were thinking, if Tammy and I can't be there face to face, who's the next one in line that can step up and help lead schools through this? And our first thought was the service centers, but that's a completely a local decision that we're not going to jump in the middle of that in any way. But we're just making sure everybody knows that these are the bedrock principles, these are expectations, and you choose who best can lead you through that.
But, the other part of that too is, is this playbook for redesigning schools. If someone in your district is just on fire for professional learning and is just a real go-getter with coaching, the playbook would take you step by step through all of that. With our support that we're able to provide this way, I don't think that you would have to. I don't think you would have to hire somebody to do that for you. And I say that in the nicest of ways, but we don't want to say that you have to go hire and spend money on a consultant to do this, because we're trying to equip you so that you don't. So that's not a requirement.
Yeah, and to that point too, we want this to be sustainable. We don't want this to be, like sometimes when you get a grant, it's a great thing, and as long as you have the grant money to support it. But when the grant money goes away, can it be sustained? We did not want to take that approach with this project, because it's so important to change our systems for the betterment of our students without additional resources. So we're trying to do this as best we can, looking at how to do this with the existing resources we have in Kansas, with the existing staff that we have in our schools. So that was it's a big part of this project. Great question.
Well, for those of you that are still on, while you might be thinking of other questions, within this file, we also have, we're starting this list of resources for schools. So all of these things are hot linked, and as you come across other resources that you think would be helpful for your Gemini colleagues, please shoot them our way to Teresa Cody, and she can add to this list. We've got just some really good links for blended learning, competency-based learning, personalized learning. This Center for Innovations in Learning, that has multiple resources for personalized learning. We work really closely with the Center on Innovations in Learning here in Kansas with our State Department of Education, and we know that everything we've put on here is of high quality, it's vetted, but this Center on Innovations in Learning, they really have a lot of meta data collected, so that's really, really helpful. There's some other things on here, including organizations you might want to follow. EdgeShelf is also a really good resource. If you, instead of researching apps yourself, trying to figure out, well, what app do we need for this or that, EdgeShelf vets a variety of apps and gives you a synopsis of what the app will do and what the age range is. And so you might find that really, really helpful. So as you're digging deeper into some of these things, these links will take you to just dozens and dozens of resources and other ideas. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that we've already started this library for you.
Okay, so are there any more questions?
I do have a question.
Sure, Rachel.
You had mentioned about the 13th and 14th, I believe, of October, and that the schools where you're going to have a mixer in the evening.
Was Thursday, October 12th.
Oh, 12th and 13th. So during the day, is that when we'll have opportunities to be are there trainings for the schools, or are there activities where we'll be meeting again with other schools, or is that later in the year?
That'll be later in the year. There won't be, the schools, the timing of that conference You know, the Mercury schools will just be getting into setting goals and things like that. So we didn't feel like, and the agenda was already full. You know, the presentation schedule was already full by the time the project even got up off the ground. So we won't have anything organized as part of the annual conference. It'll be more centered on all the 5 outcomes. But there won't be anything specific to the Mercury or the Gemini project schools at the annual conference besides the mixer.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Well, this is the overtime group. So I think we'll probably go ahead and end the call if we don't hear any more questions or something through the chat. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend.
Yeah, have a great weekend,
Give us a call
everyone.
if you guys need anything.
Yeah, thanks.
See ya.